Awesome. All right, everybody, we are indeed recording this session. I do like to record our webinars here so that you can always reflect back on the information later. My name is Rachel Jensen, owner of Luna Realty Belize, and I have a very special guest on with us today, Patrick Hiebert. Patrick and I actually used to work together back in the day for a few years, and we really created this wonderful friendship. And Patrick is somebody that I'd always looked up to. He was one of the core designers for the projects at the company that we were both at. And what I really admired about Patrick is that he put so much detail and thought into the different communities and buildings that he was creating and developing. And so it was a natural fit, as I know many of my clients are looking for eco homes, and it may be the first time that you are looking at eco home ownership. And so you really do have things that you have to bear in mind. And I know for me, I mentioned this on the webinar on Saturday, but for me, I live up north on Ambergris Key. We're not on public water here. I have a cistern. It's a water catchment system. And one day I went to go flush the toilet or put the shower on or something. And I just remember it was a toilet because there was this gurgling noise in the toilet. And then it just like made this hissing noise. And I was like, what in the world is going on? And then I tried to turn on the water in the faucet. Nothing came out. And so I called my landlord and she goes, Rachel, you're on a cistern. Have you checked the cistern to see if there's any water there? And I was like, oh, no, I haven't, because I was so used to being on public water that I never even thought about running out of water. And lo and behold, it was bone dry. The cistern was bone dry. So we had to call in someone to bring water over to us and fill our tank. But it just made me really realize that there's a lot to ownership of an eco home. And even though it's not eco home per se, here are all the features, there are eco home elements. So I like I said, I brought in the expert Patrick, and I'm going to just mute myself and turn my video off and hand it over to Patrick to run the show for us, and then I'll be back on for Q&A. You're up, Patrick.
Thanks, Rachel. Appreciate the introduction. And yeah, it's been a while since we had a chance to talk. We used to talk every day, all day long, about the different things and in resort development. But it's good to see you again. And obviously, you have a large following of people looking for home experts just like yourself. And I mean, I just want to add to the list of, a ton of respect for you, Rachel, and people can really trust in what you show them. And you are an expert, have been doing this for a long time in this region, probably one of the people that I know the longest involved in different resorts and communities in the region in Latin America. So, it's great to be back on a call with you. It's like old times, but we'll go through this presentation pretty quickly. We'll leave a bit of room for questions at the end. So really, we're going to talk a little bit about, eco home ownership and what that entails. And really, it's not really selling anything, just kind of a little informational webinar here. So who are we? My name is Patrick Hiebert, as Rachel mentioned. I'm one of the co-founders of EcoVillages. We design affordable, sustainable, eco-sensible, and freedom-oriented communities in Latin America, really throughout the tropics. Lots of beachfront and some highlands communities as well. And we focus on sustainability really in our communities. And what that means for us is, generating your own power. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit more about the consumption of power and conserving it, but there's other components to it too, and we'll get into some of those. But we really focus on communities where people can get away from reliance on governments and corporations and that's where the kind of the freedom-oriented part comes in. But my son and I lived on a sailboat for a long time, and that's where we really, probably 20 years ago, and that's where we kind of really learned about self-sustaining, right? When you're out in the ocean on a boat, you don't get the benefits of being able to plug things in, to a long extension cord kind of thing out to your boat. So we really enjoyed it. We started, catching and growing our own food and all those different things. And just, it was kind of rewarding kind of lifestyle where you're not reliant on other people. So that's where a lot of this came from. Now, we're not going to talk about all the sustainability communities or all the different things that involves, but just kind of touch on the surface of kind of eco sensibility in what we're doing. So I kind of mentioned this, we call ourselves eco-sensible. It's kind of versus eco-fanatic. I'm a big believer that you have to have a benefit, mostly financial benefit, from what you do on the eco side, or the feel good only thing is just not sustainable. People can do that for a while, but if we're not like the Green New Deal type of people. It's like, this has got to make sense. You know, if you have solar panels or a wind turbine or something and you're generating your own power, and whether you're completely off grid or just hybrid systems that cut back a lot of your power costs, the benefit has got to also be financial as well as being good for the earth. So that's where we coined the term a few years ago, eco-sensible versus, you know, eco-friendly, or even specifically eco-fanatic. There's a lot of people out there that are, you know, way over the top on doing stuff, and there's no real bang for the buck. So that's not who we are. But, you know, we do see the value of being eco-sensible, of being good earth citizens for the planet. And obviously everybody wants to, you know, keep the environment in good shape. But again, it has to also pay off financially. But a lot of people talk about, you know, when they're going to put solar panels or something on their home, a lot of people talk about, oh, I'm going to generate my own power. Yay, it's going to be great. But they don't talk so much about the consumption side. And there's two parts to this equation. And honestly, the consumption side is more important than the generation side. So you can generate power, you know, we're going to talk mostly about solar panels today. Certainly in our region where Rachel and I are located down here, she's in Belize right now. I'm coming at you from Panama. And, you know, we work in all the countries in between. And there's a lot of solar power here. We're near the equator. You get a lot of sunlight during the day, and it's very powerful. I mean, when I was living on the boat with my son, we were up on Vancouver Island, which is, you know, gets half the year of clouds and rain, and you have to have much bigger systems than you have to have down here. So it's a lot more efficient generation of power down here. But regardless of how, where, or when you're generating power, it's really important to consider the consumption, how much you consume. A lot of people just don't realize the consumption they have. You know, that we see that all the time. When people have you know, go out to the beach for the day, but leave their air conditioner, you know, blasting, and that, you know, air conditioners are my enemy. They're one of the biggest power consumers. And so every day I'm looking for, you know, different types of technologies for, you know, cooling air. We don't do any heating down here. Well, very, very, very seldomly are we heating. Heaters are another, you know, dead short, basically, you know, in terms of resistant heating and how it produces power or heat from power. Though we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I just want everybody to think about, yes, there's the generation side, there's creating the systems that generate power, but there's also a very important piece is the consumption side. So there's lots of different ways you can generate energy. Again, like I said, we're going to talk mostly about solar today. Wind is probably the second most popular one for us. There's lots of mini turbines now, the vertical ones that, you know, don't really affect animals or birds or anything nearby. Obviously, if you're lucky enough to live by a river or a stream or something like that, you can generate hydropower. That's probably the most efficient power generation you can come up with. There's geothermal. That's very popular on a bigger scale in terms of down here because there's volcanoes. Nicaragua generates somewhere between 60 and 70% of their country's power from the heat inside a volcano, generating turning turbines through steam turbines, and it's extremely efficient. It's a never-ending form of generation, and you can do that on a smaller scale with heat pumps and other types of geothermal things. One thing I like about geothermal is we have earthen bed homes that we call them in some of our communities, and you can literally run, you know, maybe a 10-inch pipe for 50 feet through the ground into the home, and the air coming through it cools off from the radiant cooling of the dirt around the tube, and really, you know, it's almost basically, well, it can be free. You don't even need a fan just because heat rises. You can put what are called clear story windows near the top of your home. That rising heat escapes out there and it sucks the heat up from the bottom, or the cool air up from the bottom. And all the homes down here have concrete and tile floors, so they're cool by nature, and it's kind of like a cold sink instead of a heat sink. And that kind of geothermal is just, the home creates a suction and it sucks that cold air into it, but it's extremely efficient and like costs nothing. So I really love those systems. They're kind of the future as far as I'm concerned. Obviously, if you're on, like I was on a sailboat, you can actually generate power from tides and even waves. The sailboats typically have a very unique kind of basically wind turbine that you can put up in the air, and the wind blows it. And then if you're on anchor and there's water rushing by you because there's a current, you can turn it down into the water, and it will generate even more power because the water has a thicker density and spins the fan better. So those are pretty cool systems too. And of course, then there's bioenergy in terms of the heat and things created from composts and stuff like that to also generate power. But we're going to focus on solar mostly in this quick little presentation. Again, consumption, huge part of the formula here. Your appliances in your home are generally your worst enemy, and when it comes to using power. Down here, air conditioners are the big one, right? The air conditioners use a motor, a compressor motor. At least under current technology, the most efficient ones are. There's other types of air conditioning going on, but they haven't quite got there yet. So things like heating elements, your electric dryers, baseboard heaters, toasters, coffee makers, anything with an element, stove, obviously. Those sorts of things are basically resistance, what I call dead short in the system, and that just takes a ton of power. And it's difficult when you're generating power from the sun and storing it in batteries. That takes a lot of power away from everything else you want to use it for. And then air conditioners, washing machines, refrigerators, things with motors are kind of your next in line culprits. Fortunately, down here we don't do any heating, so we don't have to worry about the top line there. But we do have a lot of air conditioners, and so that's where we spend most of our power. So a little hint there, I would recommend you, whenever possible, like when we design our eco-friendly homes, we always put gas stoves, gas dryers, and everything. And it's not cheating, it's just offloading. Gas is inexpensive down here, but electricity is very expensive. And so we're offloading from an expensive form of energy to a cheap form of energy. And then we don't have to generate as much power either. Lighting's a pretty easy one to solve these days. So, it used to be everybody had incandescent lights, your 60-watt bulb. And that takes quite a bit of power. I mean, nowadays that same amount of light is probably 3 to 5 watts that you're spending if you use LED lights. And the LED lights are getting better and better all the time. They're looking better in terms of like soft lighting and warm lighting versus cold lighting, and kind of phasing out fluorescent lights. I'm not a big fluorescent light fan, even though they do save a lot more power than incandescent. So when you're designing a solar power system, in my mind, there's a million different ways to go, but in my mind, you can kind of boil it down to 2 types of systems. And I know anybody that's a solar power expert in the crowd here is going to say, well, you could do this and this and this. And I know, I get it. We've done them all. It's just at a high level, I look at it like off-grid systems where you're relying 100% on your own power generation, and hybrid systems where you're trying to, take advantage of your own system for the bulk of the power needs that you have, but you're not worried about the peaks because you're going to rely on the grid power. And by grid power, it's the country's power, wherever you're getting your utility power from. So the graph is kind of meant to represent, on an off-grid system, you have to generate enough power for the peaks. Like if you're having guests over on New Year's Eve and you're partying through the night with big boom boxes and stuff like that, it takes a lot of power, and you're going to air condition, all the time and all that sort of thing. And doors are open, you're still air conditioning, all those sorts of things. You got to, if you don't want to lose power on those nights, you need to really produce enough to make sure you don't. And that can be expensive. Like, I mean, if you're trying to match the peak power usage with your system, you're going to be spending a lot more than if you're just kind of taking the regular bulk out of the system. So we do both. We do off-grid systems, especially where there is no other power source in our communities, but we also do a lot of hybrids, probably moving a lot more to hybrids, just because the initial outlay for the cost of the system is a lot lower because you need less solar panels, you need less battery power. And realistically, that's kind of the red line there. You're still shaving off the bulk of the power under the red line, but when your batteries deplete, it automatically switches over to grid power. You don't even notice it, but then you're paying for the power, right? So now your meter is running and you're paying for that peak. So the more you can keep that peak down on a hybrid system, the less you have to pay. And if you're really good at it, you can use a hybrid system that never flips to the grid. And that all depends on your consumption and, of course, the size of the system you put in. Ultimately, it does come down to your goals. Like if you're really adamant about being fully off grid, that's fine. I like that. I love not paying anything in my energy bills. And so I'm always a proponent of fully off grid systems. But that really, like I said, it's a little more, can be a lot more expensive upfront depending on your usage. And but if you're okay with a hybrid system, you can spend less. We put systems in that have maybe 6 panels, and sometimes no batteries at all. There's different names for grid tie and the hybrid systems, but we're kind of lumping them all into one hybrid grid tie kind of nomenclature in this presentation. But if you have no batteries, then obviously you're only going to be able to use the solar power that's coming during the day when the sun is shining. You have no way of storing it. So that in that system, you would be saving all your power during the day because the solar system is generating the power, and then at night it's purely from the grid. So, and it changes your behavior as well. So if you've got a system like that with no batteries, I would actually suggest you crank up all your AC systems during the day, because especially down here where we have concrete and steel homes, they act like a cold sink. I mean, your concrete 8-inch thick walls get really cold, and then they act throughout the night to just keep that cool air, like having the opposite of heating up rocks and then just letting those rocks sit there and be your heat source. This is, cooling down the concrete and tile on your floors and everything, and that becomes a cooling agent for the nighttime. So it depends, and obviously if you have batteries, you don't need to do that. If your battery storage is large enough to handle, running your air conditioners all through the night. Obviously at night, you don't typically have all your lights on and other things going. The TV's not going. And so it's really, in this climate, it's really your air conditioners that you're worried about making it through to the morning. So quick summary of kind of the components in a solar power system. You have the panels. Obviously the panels convert solar electricity or solar power, sun rays into electricity. And some people think it's from the heat, and the hotter it is, the better they're going to work. It's actually the opposite. The hotter it is, the more resistance is, the less they work. But yeah, they're built to handle extreme heat. So obviously they're facing the sun all day long in very hot climates. But it's the UV light basically that produces the chemical exchange that creates the power. And what the inverter does, the next one in line there, is takes that power, which is DC, direct current generated power from the solar panels, and converts it into alternating current, which is the kind of power you use in your house. So whether you plug in, your coffee maker or whatever it is, your TV, that's all expecting your, 120 volt, 110, 120 volt AC power. And that's what the inverter's job is. It takes that power from the solar panels and converts it into normal usable power that your appliances and your lights and everything don't know the difference where the power is coming from, whether you're a regular grid utility-based home or solar-powered home. A charge controller its job is really to make sure your batteries are always being optimally charged, not overcharging, not undercharging when the solar panels are producing power. And that often is combined into an inverter. There's inverter charge controllers that are one unit, and they typically have, the good ones typically have a grid connection too, so you can choose later, even on an off-grid system, to go hybrid if you want to, by plugging in the regular utility line into your inverter, and it will switch automatically between the battery power, the solar power, and the grid power. And then batteries are probably, if you want to be off-grid, batteries are one of your most important components. Nowadays, the batteries are 1,000 times better than when I started doing this. We used to use basically golf cart batteries, which are just like, glorified car batteries, the wet cell kind of batteries, and they're notoriously bad at storing charge for a long time. They're good at starting your car and stuff like that on short bursts, but they're not, even the deep cycle ones are not really very good. But now they have LiPo batteries, which is lithium iron phosphate batteries that are like the ones used in your cell phone or whatever, just on a much bigger scale. And the new ones don't have that kind of exploding tendency. Fortunately, they figured that out. And you can, the prices are coming down. They're pretty expensive still, but they have the beauty of it, like the old car battery type, the deep cycle wet cell batteries, they get down to 65, maybe 60% of their life, and then it would just be a cliff. They just drop off, and that's it. They're dead. They just can't maintain the voltage that they're supposed to maintain. The nice thing about the lithium batteries is it's a nice steady drop down to almost less than 10% of their capacity, and they're still producing the right voltage for the system. And so you get way more. It's like LED lights, right? You get way more use out of the longer term use. So they're more expensive, but they last way longer and they produce a lot more power. So they're definitely the way to go, and until the technology changes again and there's something new. So cost savings, I want to just give a little example here. Obviously, we know our kind of our costs down here in this Latin American, Central American region. So I kind of apply it to that. But I came from down here many years ago from British Columbia in Canada, and there's a lot of hydro power there. So your cost per kilowatt hour is very low. Down here, not so much. I mean, a lot of the power is generated by diesel, and I know in certain parts of the countries down here, you can pay as much as 45 cents per kilowatt hour, where when I left Vancouver area in Canada, we were paying 10, 12 cents. So it's like 4 times more expensive down here than what I was paying up there. Fortunately, your solar systems can be a lot smaller because you get a lot more sunlight. But it makes for the payback period much faster down here, because the cost to buy the power is so much higher here, and the cost of the solar systems is much lower because you need a much smaller system. So we take a pretty efficient 12,000 BTU air conditioner, which is kind of your bedroom, maybe a little bit larger room than bedroom, split systems that people tend to use. Once they're running, they kind of run it around. These days, like a 20 SEER. Just as a side note, you can take the SEER rating that you read on air conditioners and take the BTU and divide one into the other. So if you have a 12,000 BTU system and divided by a 20 SEER air conditioning rating, you're going to get roughly 600 watts. That'll tell you more or less what that thing's going to use on a kind of when it's on going. Obviously, an air conditioner switches on and off to keep the temperature at a certain setting. But you'd also be surprised, just another little side note, for every 2 degrees or so in this climate of lowering the temperature, you're doubling the amount of power it takes. So I've become kind of acclimatized to this region. So I literally leave my air conditioner on at night. It's about 26, which is probably about 78 degrees or so, something like that. Maybe a little bit more, 80 Fahrenheit. And people probably think, oh, that's crazy. I'd never be able to sleep in that. And it's like, well, you get used to the heat when it's much higher during the day. That feels nice and cool at night. But if I have our air conditioner set at 26, I'm using half the power that if I'm setting it at 24, and half the power again if I'm setting it at 22. And that's not exact science, but that's a pretty good ballpark ratio. And so you can see that if you like your air conditioner set at like 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 or whatever that works out to, you're going to use a lot of power. It's going to be on most of the time. And so anyway, a 600 watt air conditioner running for 12 hours a day, which means like half the time, which is probably set at like 21, 22 Celsius. At 40 cents per kilowatt is $86 a month. So obviously, that adds up pretty quickly if you have multiple air conditioners, multiple bedrooms going and things like that. But a $400 a month power bill down here is even for not in a very large home is pretty common. So a properly designed system that costs maybe $10,000 at the low end to $15,000 can probably offset half of that. So when you look at that, half of that is $200 a month. In 4 to 6 years, that is paid for itself. And these systems last 25 to 30 years quite easily these days. So, after the 4 to 6 years, it's all gravy after that. You are not paying for that power at all. You've paid your system back by savings on the monthly basis. So I think that's, worthwhile just having an example here to see what you're actually saving. I mean, in our communities, in our self-sustaining communities, there's a lot more to than just renewable energy and, generating and consumption of your own power. We have all sorts of parts that go into natural water sources, perfect growing conditions. We try to, like, for instance, we're creating a property community here in Panama right now in the Highlands, which is, its claim to fame is springtime all the time. You have that nice, perfect weather kind of all year round, and you can grow anything. So we do a lot of, community food production, community orchards and gardens, but also people can have lifestyle farms, kind of what we used to call hobby farms, where they're smaller. You might have chickens, goats, and things like that, but you're also growing some food as well. So just for that whole sustainability part, we really, put a lot of effort into making sure that these communities are really, producing whatever it needs, all the needs of humans on their own. So you're not reliant on any, and they're resilient to being outside forces. And obviously we create, really nice, pretty efficient homes too. So it's all part of the community plan. But the renewable energy, the solar systems and things like that are a big part of it. As Rachel knows, we have communities in Belize, Panama, Honduras, Nicaragua, and looks like my font didn't quite work out for some reason on here, but we like to believe we're building very beautiful homes. They're very efficient. We use all sorts of features to make them efficient. Like I was talking about earlier with the clear story windows, it sucks the hot air at the top of the home, pulls in the cool air from the bottom, and it really minimizes your air conditioning costs. And we build a lot. We introduced tiny homes to the region, and they really took off. Part of that is because down here you have such a nice climate all year round. You don't have to go out and shovel snow ever or anything like that. We never get in temperatures that are less than maybe 20, 15 degrees Celsius, maybe 65 in Fahrenheit in Belize would be, it's about as cold as it gets. Most of the other countries down here are even a little warmer. They rarely get below 70, 75 degrees Fahrenheit, and then mid low 20s. And then of course you're up in much higher than that in the middle of the day. But because of that, you can spend a lot more time outdoors. And most people and expats that have moved down to this region do. They spend a lot more time outdoors. So they find very soon that they don't need all these big extra spaces that you need if you're, in Minnesota in winter. You have a great room and all these big dining rooms and things like that. Well, down here, I usually take my plate and go out on the deck, and even, watching football or hockey. I'm Canadian, of course, I watch hockey, right? So I like to do that outdoors, have the TV outside. And so I don't like to spend my time indoors, and so a lot of people have downsized their life. It makes a lot less expense in buying your home. It makes a lot less expense in cooling your home, and all the other pieces, maintaining it. So all in all, it's the introduction of tiny homes to the region has been really popular. But that's not to say we don't make some really grand homes too. We have 4,000 or 5,000 square foot, 500 square meter homes, kind of estate homes, and then we have everything in between. We design condominium buildings as well. So we like to, kind of match the style. Like the Belizean home at the top left is kind of that tropical Belizean, sort of Mediterranean style. The Panamanian one is a more modern, as well as the Honduran one's a more modern homes. And then the bottom left is in Nicaragua, and that's the Spanish colonial style. So we mix a lot of architectural styles, but make really beautiful homes. And I think you'd really love them. I had more slides in here, different things that we have in terms of interiors of the homes and things like that. But wanted to make sure we left some room for questions, and Rachel wanted to talk about anything else. But if you're interested in contacting us and through Rachel as well, you can contact us at luna@EcoVillages.life. And if you want to see some of the other communities and homes that we have, feel free to go to www.EcoVillages.life. Remember, that's .life, not .com, and that's an unusual domain, so people sometimes miss that part. Hopefully that helps a little bit, Rachel. So
I think so. I mean, I always learn a lot from this. I know for me, like as I mentioned earlier, the eco homes was just something a little bit different, right? And you don't really know what you need and what you don't need, so it really did help. And I do just want to point out, because I see a couple of folks on here who I've been chatting about Aruna with. And so Aruna is the development in Belize that Patrick actually designed. So if you saw some pictures in there, you're like, I think that looks familiar. that is indeed the Aruna project on the canals here on Ambergris. So yes, Patrick is the designer there, which is neat to see how those dots get connected. So what we're going to do now, folks, is have the Q&A session open. So feel free to go to the control panel there and feel free to type in any questions that you may have on your mind that you would like for Patrick to answer. You know, I think Patrick's experience in this and knowledge in this is really quite evident. And for some of you, if you are newer to the eco world, this is a great time for you to ask those thoughts that are on your mind. And Patrick, maybe some people don't even know what sort of questions to ask. I know for me, that's how I am. So is there anything that you think, I know obviously you just spoke for about 30 minutes, but is there anything that you think people should be asking that perhaps they don't know to when they're just getting started in this space?
Well, I think, you know, probably the single most difficult part to deal with is with eco homes, especially solar powered homes, and the further you go to off grid is the consumption part. And I try to make that as, as evident as possible without beating it over the head. But, like I've had people over this last week in my home here in Panama, and they were gone for the day, and I go past the room and realize, oh, they left the air conditioner on it, like ice cold. And it's like, I think people forget, especially if there's unlimited power and maybe it's not too expensive where you live now. It is expensive down here. It is expensive in a lot of parts of the country, and it's going to go up, especially given all the, the nonsense that's going on in energy over the last few months here, and the Ukraine war and the Russian situation and everything. I think you're going to see a lot of increases in the cost of oil, gas, and power, basically energy forms. So it's good to get into the habit now of learning how to save. And it doesn't take much. It's like a lot of people don't like automation, and they think it's kind of like spying on them. And I get that. I don't like, Siri, or, I'm not even going to say it because she's here, Alexa. But like I'm in our office now, and I'm very, very energy conscious, as you can imagine. I don't like spending a dime on, paying the government or the utility company for my energy uses. So I have our thermostat here. It automatically goes on when somebody comes into the office, and it goes off when they leave. So on holidays, like tomorrow here in Panama is a holiday, there's not going to be anybody in the office. I don't have to remember, about the air conditioner going on or off. Like a lot of people use scheduling, but I kind of take it to the next level in terms of, I have geofencing for all of, we have a lot of rental homes and things. So if you go, a kilometer or half a mile away from our home, it switches everything off. Like you don't have to remember to do it. So for my 2 cents is, the best thing to learn is how to minimize consumption, because that just makes everything less expensive. Not only, even if you have nothing, in terms of eco-sensible stuff, it still saves you a lot of money. So that's the part I would focus on. If I was doing a course on how to get the biggest bang for your buck out of your solar system, I would spend 90% of the time on the consumption side.
It's true. And I remember growing up, whenever we would leave a light on in a room, my dad would charge us 25 cents. My siblings, so we got so used to just turning off the light switches anytime we left the room. But it's good to carry that forward, right, later on in life. And especially, like you mentioned, Patrick, the electricity in Latin America is expensive. And where we are, I'm in Belize. I think many of you know that, but I'm in Belize and on an island. And sometimes the first time I got my electric bill, I was so thrown off by it. I was living in a small condo, 500 square feet. I think my first electric bill was about $400 US. And it's because I left the AC on, right? I mean, you just, that's typically what you do. You want your room to be cold when you come in, but the building, I have to say, was really well insulated. And so after I got that first bill, I was like, oh, I don't need to keep the AC on even when I'm not here. And then what I realized is that the concrete building, like you talked about with the concrete structures, it really is a great insulator for keeping the cool air in. So you don't need to keep the AC on in order to have that room still feel cool when you come in hours later. So it's a good point. And I think a lot of times people just don't realize how expensive it's going to be until they actually get that first bill when they're connected to the grid, and they're like, oh.
Well, your dad is my hero for doing that. I wish I would have charged my kids, because I would just go into their rooms and turn everything off. When they went to school or whatever. I should have just left it on and charged them for it. But
and 25 cents is a lot when you're a child too. I mean, this was also 30 years ago, but I mean, it's a lot. And
Yeah,
so
well, it's
little
funny
things like that
because
that we can remember.
my kids used to bug me all the time about how I was just like, like, remember that Seinfeld episode of the soup Nazi or whatever? I was
Uh-huh.
the
Yep.
power Nazi in our house. But then when they moved out and had to pay their own bills for the first time, they all came back and went, I'm sorry, you were right. I was wrong. This is crazy how expensive this is. Because my
It's
son
true.
Spencer, who works with me as a co-founder of EcoVillages, I think he told me, well, he had roommates, so he blamed them. But I think he said he had like a $900 power bill or something like that in Canada, which is hard to do. You got to use a lot of power. But his roommates would open the fridge and just leave it open and walk away from it, and things like that. And little things that you don't even think about. Like I had somebody actually just last week ask me, like, why is my power bill so high? And it took me a long time to figure out what was going on. But he had a little leak in his hot water heater. But he had a drain in the floor right behind it, so he couldn't even tell it was leaking. It was just constantly pouring hot water down the drain. And so his hot water heater was on 24/7, right? And hot water heaters are right up there with the most expensive things you can find in terms of power usage, because they have most of them have two elements, one on top and one on the bottom. And that's just like turning your stove, two elements of your stove on and just walking away. And that's expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes, checking and doing the maintenance and stuff like that is good too, because you don't even know. Like he had nobody renting his home in August, and he had something like a $600 power bill. And he's like, well, where is this going? And like, is the meter broken or something? And they tested the meter was fine. And so that's what it was. It was $600 of hot water poured down the drain. So
Yeah, that adds up. And I know that you were talking about, the AC and the HVAC really being the biggest consumer of energy. I think in the last report I saw about 47% of the energy usage. But also, folks, I want to point out, I know, it's a lot of times we have conveniences, right? Living in North America, and I think that's where many of you are at, there's conveniences, there's the AC, there's the dishwasher, there's the dryer, and those are huge consumers of electricity. And so I know, Patrick, you do a lot with the gas, so gas stoves, gas dryer, that's what we have here in Belize too. But you will find that there really aren't dishwashers. I know of one condo complex here that has a dishwasher, and it's one of the high-end, more luxury. I'm sure there are other luxury ones here, but with my own eyes, I've only seen one complex with dishwashers. And so I think that, I don't have one here at my house. We just have gotten so used to doing the dishes. And so you have to bear in mind too, if you do want that dishwasher, you're probably going to have to up your solar panel usage or go for the hybrid. And it's just little things like that, like what, and think about it, we can't answer these questions for you, but what is important to you? What is important for your comfort? And are you able to get that through an eco home? And then Patrick, you also mentioned, I like that you mentioned the hybrid systems that you have created. I think that makes a lot of sense for people who don't necessarily, maybe they're not ready to make that full jump overseas. What we have found in Belize is there are some places that are doing that, but do remember too, and I know for our folks that were on the webinar on Saturday, that sometimes people are going totally off grid because they don't get public utilities up there yet, right? So you may not get public water, you may not get a line for the electricity. So if that's the case, then you will have to be full off grid, which, just take some readjusting to, but it, in the end of the day, I think a lot of people are happier doing that. So just something too for you to bear in mind. And I do see a couple questions over here. This is a great question from Aaron. You build your homes on site or off site?
On site there. I mean, we build tiny homes, and a lot of them, we obviously build big homes too and things like that. But unlike in North America, one of the things we're kind of blessed with down here is lax rules in terms of, like in North America, you have your tiny home, if it is a tiny home, has to be on wheels. Otherwise, it's not generally legal to even build a home that small in a lot of places. It's unfortunate. I don't know why the rule exists, but down here we can build any size of home for the most part, and we build full concrete foundations, concrete and steel walls, and tile roofs and everything. They're real homes that'll be here 500 years from now, but they're not on wheels, so they're built just like any other home on site.
Got it. And then this is a follow-up to Erin's question here. She says, sorry if I missed this part. Are these homes only available in one of your communities, or can you build them anywhere in Belize?
For the most part, we do not do kind of designs outside of our communities. It depends. We do work with some other developers, or on occasion, we've done one-off homes for somebody that had some really unique thing that they wanted. But it's really kind of more about our communities that we focus on.
Got it. And then if anyone on this line is looking to do their own development or thinking on a larger scale, then Patrick can certainly help there too. And then Jane is saying, what are future technology improvements in solar currently in development or current ideas not yet in development?
Well, I mean, the technology improves almost weekly, it seems. Like literally, it wasn't long ago we were putting in 175-watt panels that were, about 5 feet long, almost 3 feet wide. And that was the norm. And then literally, a few months later, the norm was 250 to 300, and then it was 400, 425. Now it's about 600 watts, and the panel hasn't got any bigger. It's the same size panel, it's just way more efficient. So the solar panel side is rapidly changing. The battery side is rapidly changing, and everybody kind of follows that kind of stuff, sees like these lithium iron phosphate batteries are amazing compared to the older batteries, but I wouldn't be surprised if 6 months from now something new comes out again, and whether they're hydrogen powered batteries or whatever the next thing is. The thing is, for me, at some point you kind of just got to bite the bullet, get that bang for the buck value out of it. And most of the systems, in fact pretty much all the systems, are upgradable. Like at some point you go, well, upgradable or almost mixable too. Like if a new type of battery came along, you could say, okay, well, I'm going to add that to my existing battery, so it's not a waste with what I bought. Or you can add solar panels at different power. I mean, you have to be smart about it, the way you're connecting them and everything, but you could have 200-watt panels, 3 of them in one bank, which is 600-watt, beside a new 600-watt panel, and they would think the combined 3 would think it's the same as the one, right? So the inverter would deal with it and the charge controller would deal with it. But there's lots of different, like the old panels too. Like if you had a tree nearby or something and the sun would shade even part of the panel, that panel would shut down basically because it couldn't deal with part of it not working. Now that's changed a lot, where they're kind of individual components in there that they still will produce. If 10% of the panels block, it'll still produce 90% of the power rather than 0. So there's a lot of different technologies going on. And I mean, I'm a big fan of Tesla and what they do. They've really pushed the whole thing forward a lot, obviously with the cars and Tesla battery packs and everything. Honestly, though, we don't use Tesla stuff because you're paying for the name. So not to bash Tesla at all, but you can buy the exact same things that are just as good quality for sometimes a third of the cost. So.
Got it. And then based on your experience, Patrick, how often are people having to replace solar panels and batteries in the whole system?
Well, we actually have some,
right?
We have some system that we put on, that was through our foundation, Help Him Help Himself in Nicaragua. We put a system on a school. It was the late 90s or early 2000s. So it's been there like 20 some years, still going. So wow. The panels will go for like I think they even warranty most of them these days for like 25 years. So they're really resilient and keep going. It's pretty hard to break them. Like, we don't get much hail or anything like that down here, but even that, they're pretty resilient. The batteries, I mean, the like the lithium iron phosphate batteries last quite a long time. I mean, they're probably in the 7 to 8 year range. And then they, it's funny how everybody was complaining about iPhone batteries dying so fast. It turns out, I think everybody knows this now, that they weren't really dying. It was the software saying they were dying because Apple wanted you to buy a new iPhone, right? So the battery, like I just did an upgrade on my iPhone. Lo and behold, my battery lasts about half as long as it did yesterday. So it's just in the software. So these systems don't have any of those kind of false failures, basically. So the batteries will last quite a while. By the time you're replacing the batteries in 7 years, I'm sure there's going to be a radically different technology, plus the cost, like everything else. I mean, those lithium, like we usually use 5 kilowatt hour batteries, lithium batteries, and so you can kind of plug and play them. A nice system maybe has 3 of those, so you're at 15 kilowatt. And those were $6,000 a piece a year and a half or 2 years ago. Now they're about 2,000. So literally the prices of this stuff continues to drop radically. And the panels too, like this 175 watt panel 3 or 4 years ago was, I don't know, $500 or something. Now we pay under $200 for a 600 watt panel. So again, they're just way more competition in the space and way better technology, and it just keeps improving. So I can't really predict what's going to be around next month, but it's kind of like with laptops and computers. At some point, you got to just bite the bullet and say, well, this one's good enough. I know by Christmas there's going to be one with more memory or more, CPU power or whatever. But at some point, you just got to say that this one's the one for me, and not have future envy. So
it's true. You get into this like paralysis, really just waiting and waiting and waiting. But that is exactly right. All right, I don't see any other questions come in, folks. Do you have any other questions? I'll give you another minute or two to type those in. Otherwise, you see there the email address on the screen, luna@EcoVillages.life. Feel free to shoot us a message if you can think of anything afterwards that goes to both Patrick and me, and we'll be able to get those questions answered for you. We are recording this session, so you will get a copy of the recording probably by the end of the day today. So feel free to review it if there's anything that you wanted to recap. And if that sparked any more questions, that's the email address again, luna@EcoVillages.life. Patrick, before we sign off here, any last things you'd like to say to our audience or anybody who's listening in the future on YouTube?
Well, this is a little detail thing, but I was going to mention it earlier when you were talking about dishwashers and things like that. The best systems that we found for hot water are the instant hot gas systems. Obviously, there's no power used and there's no wasting gas either or electricity to store hot water when you're not using it. So just a little aside, I mean, the instant hot electricity ones take an enormous amount of power while they're on. So you got to kind of build your solar system to handle that. So I really recommend instant hot gas. Down here in this region, that's 90% of what's offered anyway. I know in North America, that's a lot less common. Most people have these, 40, 60 gallon hot water tanks. Those are basically the most inefficient appliance you have in your home, but, next to air conditioners and your stove. But, so I would just, when you're building your own home kind of system, if that's what you want to do, go through all the appliances that you use, first of all, and think about and look into alternatives to what can use less power. And you can literally make a chart, and there's a lot of these on the websites around the internet as well, where you can literally plug in the appliances that you have, and it will pump out a number and say you're going to need to produce this amount of power every day, right? And then you can just build your system to that. And if the more stuff you can eliminate, like if you can take out an electric hot water tank and replace it with an instant water heater that's gas, I mean, that eliminates a huge chunk, right? It means you can build a much smaller system and again, save a lot of money. So that would, my 2 cents would be, take a look at the different sites out there. There's a lot of them that have a lot of good information, lots of YouTube videos that have great information. And of course, you can send us an email. We're always happy to help out. We're kind of trying to push the movement, right? So, we're happy to answer people's questions.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Patrick, for joining us today. I know I learned a lot. Hopefully all of you online learned a lot as well. We look forward to hearing from everybody with thoughts, questions, or if you want to see any of the developments or projects that Patrick has been working on, feel free to reach out for that information too. We get that over to you. And in the meantime, have a fantastic rest of your day. And thank you everyone for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks very much.